Call to order the workshop for the Arvada City Council for October 14th, 2019. Call upon Kristen Rush to call roll.
Mayor Williams.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Marriott.
Here.
Councilmember Piper.
Here.
Here.
Councilmember Jones.
Here.
Councilmember McGough.
Here.
Councilmember Miller.
Here.
Very good. We have two workshops tonight. Mr. Devon, you want to talk to us about pedestrian safety pilot projects?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I want to talk to you only so far as I would introduce the people that really will present the information, which is John Ferruzzi and Adam Lynn from our Public Works Engineering.
Evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, Mayor and members of council. So we're here to present to you a concept known as lighter, quicker, cheaper, which is something that we want to pilot in the city of Arvada in a couple of locations and basically measure and see how it performs to improve pedestrian safety and basically try to see what we could do with creating some harmony between pedestrians at crosswalks and motorists and folks on our street. By the way, I'm John Ferruzzi, Senior Transportation Planner with the Traffic Division. I'm here with Adam Lind, Bike Ped Coordinator with the Traffic Division of Public Works. So for a number of years, we've been tracking some of our hotspots around town with school zones and within Old Town where pedestrians are quite active. And these are locations where basically, in some cases, we hear about citizen concerns, folks that feel like they're being bullied in the sidewalk, or we hear about issues related to parking too close to intersections. We hear about some of the concerns that the public has related to basically kids in these areas, or someone trying to catch the G line and trying to cross the street when someone else is not expecting them. And we've been trying to figure out what we could do to help with these type of solutions. The concept that we're going to bring to your attention today and talk a little bit about, we are proposing to pilot in two locations. One is 57th Avenue, which is along the Arvada K-8 section, a school zone. And the second location is within Old Town at the intersection of Grandview and Webster Street. At that location, that's where the G-Line station is located, and there's quite a lot of pedestrian activity in Old Town. So we'll go over the project background for each location and explain our proposed concept of lighter, quicker, cheaper, and explain how we're going to monitor the project and work with the community to see how this performs, and if successful, what future opportunities we might have with this approach to our other crosswalk locations and intersections. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Adam.
Thanks, John. So yeah, this idea of lighter, quicker, cheaper is kind of a way to solve problems that jurisdictions across the country are having. Funding is always tight no matter what the situation is. Doing projects can cost tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And in that process of design and construction, you could be waiting 2 to 3 to 4 years to deliver projects to the public. And if you have a kid at an elementary school, when you want to wait 4 years for that to happen, your kid's already gone and out to the next school. So this is in response to some of those questions that we get, and the answer is, why should we wait when there's other solutions out there? So we're looking to some other jurisdictions that have done this. This is from Washington, D.C. You can see using flex posts and kind of a curb base to create a wider pedestrian waiting area to tighten up the radius so that cars that are turning are going slower, and to also help to shorten that crossing distance for pedestrians. Same thing in Minneapolis, a little bit more color. And then in Seattle, they're getting really colorful and doing something that's kind of fun for the community to be engaged in. But this is the general concept of what we're talking about specifically on West 57th Avenue. So here's the general project area, and those 4 red circles there you can see in front of the park and the school are where we're looking at to pilot these temporary curb extensions. So this is kind of the general design. The top picture there is our idea for the material that we're going to use, and then those green dots and the white line kind of represent the space that will be painted and where the flex posts will be pushed and located. So you can see they have a variety of goals of reducing crossing distance for pedestrians and kids going to school, improving the sight lines for not only for pedestrians but also for drivers. If you're looking to make a right or a left, you've got some more space to see down the street when cars are coming. If you're a pedestrian, you've got some more space to become visible. Again, you're not getting blocked by a vehicle that's parked. We're hoping to reduce the speeds of turning vehicles. So, now if you're driving there without anything, you can kind of cut through the bike lane and the parking lane and make that turn a little bit faster than we would like to see in a school zone. And also, as John mentioned, to help prevent unlawful parking so people aren't parking directly at the intersections.
Yes, Nancy?
Adam, this concept was discussed at the bid meeting in September, I believe, and one of the comments made was, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could do something artistic with that area? Is that something that's a possibility for that area in particular?
Yes, it is possible. At this point in our initial proposal, we kind of just want to move forward with something a little bit more basic before we got the whole community involved and did a big art project. But in the future, this is something that could be expanded, kind of like the Seattle photo where it becomes colorful and it's the school's colors in the street or something like that is definitely an option. And so the other big benefit of lighter, quicker, cheaper is the cheaper part. And so this is kind of just a high-level overview. On the left is more or less what we're proposing. And for these 9 curb extensions, roughly about $8,000 estimate total in terms of materials, labor, and installation. On the right side is kind of the permanent feature, which one of the goals of lighter, quicker, cheaper is you can make these more permanent. But to do 9 of those would be about $120,000. So based on the budget, one of these seems like a much more realistic proposal from our viewpoint. In terms of communication and outreach, we're very aware that this is something new and different for the community, and we're going to want to make sure that they're aware of what's going on and and have a chance to give feedback. So we've been working with Ben and Rachel to talk about this kind of inform and consult process. So far, we've thought of using a Speak Up Arvada website, online surveys, social media, using the school as a resource to get newsletters out to the kids and their families. And also give residents the opportunity to ask questions and share concerns, whether that's digitally or in person, both before and after the installation. So we want to do some feedback and information gathering on the front end, but then after the installation and while it's going on, to get feedback as well about how things are working, what the community thinks, and that way we can keep that information throughout the project. And as we mentioned, so once we get all that data, we definitely want to be able to use it and see, is the public happy with this? Is it having the effect that we are hoping, or is it doing something that we didn't foresee? And then that'll kind of help guide our decision-making process at the end. So in terms of measuring success, we have a few ideas for data collection, not only on this kind of survey and feedback from the public, but using video monitoring to see driver behavior, both before and after the installation. Are people yielding to pedestrians more when they're crossing? Are those turning speeds actually slower? Are we seeing kind of better behavior that we're looking for? Looking at pedestrian counts to see if more people feel comfortable walking. So are there more people walking and using these crosswalks now? And also doing speed surveys, so seeing if speeding in the corridor is going down, staying the same, or what's happening with that. So in terms of some potential issues that we've kind of thought of and talked about internally, maintenance is the biggest one that comes to mind. There's daily maintenance of cars hitting these posts, which does happen, and then kind of special events with snow plowing and street sweeping. How are we going to handle that? So we've met our traffic division and streets division to kind of talk through some of these issues. We're planning to kind of go out there with them and work on the design to make sure that their plows and big trucks can make the turns without hitting the post, because we don't want to have to go back and keep installing and reinstalling those. That kind of takes away from the cost benefits. But we've worked together a little bit and got started and believe this can be done successfully. Community feedback on aesthetics is something that we're prepared to hear and see how that works. The flex post is kind of the initial start for this. It's been tested in a lot of environments. It's been shown to be effective, but whether the community seems okay with that or they want something different, there's other options out there to kind of do the same thing in terms of dividing space for pedestrians and slowing down vehicles. And from our perspective, if we hope this is successful, we get a lot of requests from neighborhoods already about we need crosswalk improvements, we need new crosswalks, there's speeding going on. So we see this being successful, and then we'll have to develop a process to figure out how we're going to implement this in other areas and how to prioritize that process as well. So we're going to switch gears real quick.
Mr. Jones has a question before you move on.
Yes, sir.
And then Ms. Miller has a question. And then Mr. McGough, and then Mr. Marriott.
All right, good point to stop now.
So with that, are there going to be any consideration as to the crosswalk and the beacon style, illumination that will, alert the driver if they're not seeing kind of this change in the roadway, but is there something like we've done on Quaker by Westwoods and a couple of other places where you've had that beacon installed?
Yeah, so with this project and it kind of being guided towards this lighter, quicker, cheaper implementation, it's not going to include those rectangular rapid flashing beacons because that makes the cost of the project go up. It is something in the future that we can then come back and install to kind of take the crosswalk up to the next level if need be. There's basic signage that we can add where new crosswalks are, just your standard crosswalk sign. But at this point, we're not proposing to include any of those RFBs, mainly for funding reasons at this time.
Just out of curiosity, do you know off the top of your head how much each one of those posts cost?
They're roughly around $12,000 with like solar and other kind of communication equipment.
Okay. But something like you said, as we get further into this and better understand it, and maybe it's when you get to the point of making this a permanent change is when we could consider something like that?
Yeah, certainly.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Miller?
Thank you. So I would love to keep in mind the aesthetic piece of it. So a lot of cities I've seen, even in Edgewater, are putting up these flex posts to create roundabouts at four-way stops, and they look, and then they get bumped, and then they look dirty, and then they just look worse. So I've seen a lot of, I was in Chicago recently where they do paint the inside of the street green, and then it looks like a white picket fence. I mean, it looks cool. So there are some options to make it look prettier. That's going to sound so weird coming from me. But the other thing is there's some really creative crosswalk paintings that you can do that slow down traffic. They have some cool 3D stuff that makes you really want to stop your car before you drive into it because you think you're going to hit something. So there's some options there that look cool, would draw attention to people, and would be aesthetically pleasing.
Definitely.
Mr. McGough?
Yes, thank you. I'm wondering, I don't think you mentioned it. If you did, it went by me too quickly. How much is the pedestrian crossing distance reduced by doing this?
Yeah, so we're looking at basically the width of the parking lane. So you've got roughly 8 feet from kind of the face of the curb until where that bike lane starts in these
So that would be
locations.
16 feet?
On both sides.
So reduction, okay, so. And my other question is, how long of an evaluation period do you expect in the initial stages? When will you take a look at it to say, yep, this is working, or it needs more
we're planning to
modification?
evaluate throughout the process, but we're looking at like a 6-month pilot project.
6 months,
So that'll get
okay.
us kind of time for people to adjust, have school be in session, and then have a significant time to collect
Okay.
data as well.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Marriott?
I have a quick question. So on 57th, I see the spots where you're proposing doing this, but the place that I've heard the most questions about on 57th is actually 57th and Yukon. Why not there?
Yeah.
So the issues that we're seeing at 57th and Yukon are related to parking and sightlines. And when we apply the sight distance triangles to that intersection, it begins to wipe out all the parking on 57th Avenue. It's kind of a different issue altogether. We wanted to start this at a location where the issue is predominantly the crosswalks and pedestrians crossing. At 57th and Yukon and some of the other intersections, there aren't crosswalks in all directions, and we wanted to test this out where we've got, a few of these crosswalks in multiple directions within a school zone and that kind of thing. Now, if they do prove to be successful, that is one of the locations that we're considering, along with several other hotspots that we're monitoring right now.
Okay, thank you.
I'd agree with Mr. Marriott that 57th and Yukon is in fact, I was with the former city attorney, and he almost got his T-boned in that intersection, so.
Stay away from
Glad that didn't happen. Any other questions on 57th before we switch gears?
Go ahead, shift gears.
Okay, great. So yeah, the next project we want to talk about is in Old Town. So a little bit of background. Staff has been discussing a few streetscape issues that are currently going on, including crosswalks, some complaints about pedestrian and traffic safety, and other items. The existing pavers that are in the crosswalks have some issues with maintenance, and we won't get into the details, but it's pretty hard to keep those in stock and replaced as needed, and so sometimes you've seen they get filled with asphalt, which is a little bit of an aesthetic issue. And the city has been coordinating internally and with other stakeholders, such as the bid on this project. So just a quick overview. This in the red just highlights where Grandview and Webster is, and we'll move on. So this is kind of the existing condition out there. It's not the most visible crosswalk that you can see. While Grandview isn't stop controlled, so drivers don't necessarily expect pedestrians there, and it also is the entrance to the G-line station, so there is a high amount of pedestrian activity at this location. So our goal is to make these crosswalks much more visible and make pedestrians much safer. So we looked through a few different potential solutions, doing something that keeps the aesthetic of Old Town with the brick, but is a different kind of treatment. And also looking at using planters and some other things that are kind of keep with the beautification, but also reduce the crossing distance and help out with pedestrian safety. So these are kind of some concepts that we looked at that were across the country. And this is more or less our recommended solution at this time for the pilot project. So with the crosswalks, we're planning to use that top left kind of brick style thermoplastic. So it's a little bit brighter. It has white lines on the outside to kind of mark the crosswalk area, again, a little bit more defined. And then using planters in the median to create pedestrian refuge islands, so that if you're a pedestrian, while it is a short distance to cross, sometimes you get caught in the middle, and instead of getting stuck standing on a double yellow, you have a 5-foot area that you can kind of wait until that car passes and make the next lane crossing. And then also, in order to do that, we have to shift the lanes a little bit. So that's been shown to have some positive benefits for reducing traffic speeds as people see an object and they have to go around it. So hopefully that should help to slow down some traffic right in front of this area. And so this is kind of, again, the existing view now, and then this is conceptually what we're talking about. So the crosswalks, again, pop out a little more, using these planters and the state law yield sign to, again, bring attention to drivers that this is a pedestrian area, be on the lookout. And the planters would be both on this kind of front side of the intersection and on the back side as well. So both of those crosswalks on Grandview would get the same kind of treatment. So in terms of kind of the bigger picture for Old Town, if this is successful, it can be applied to other crosswalks in the area. We chose Webster and Grandview as it's kind of a high pedestrian area right in the middle of Old Town, right access to the G-line station, and there are existing parking and site distance issues in this area again. In terms of data collection, we're planning to do something similar to the West 57th project in terms of surveys, outreach, video data collection, and again, 6 months for that pilot project period. And we did go and present this idea and concept to the bid, and while they had lots of ideas about doing more and being more artistic, for the pilot period, they agreed that we could stick with kind of this design and then reevaluate once this proposal moves forward.
Mr. Marriott's got a question.
So yeah, actually, if you want to finish up with this slide, and then I'll ask you the question.
Okay. So yeah, in terms of cost estimate, in order to do that new kind of brick thermoplastic treatment for the crosswalks, we have to take all of the pavers out, put in a new layer of asphalt, and then apply that treatment to the top. So that does cost about $7,500. The 4 planters that we looked at are about $1,500 total. And then installation of that special brick material is about $16,000, so about $25,000 for this full intersection improvement.
Okay, so let me ask you a couple questions. If you don't mind going back a couple of slides, keep going one more back maybe. So are any of these pictures actually that plastic material, or is
Yeah,
that?
the top left is.
The top left is. Have you seen any of that around here? I mean, how does that look after it gets a couple years old, and does it look like plastic, or does it look like?
No, I mean, it still looks like it has the brick look to it. I mean, there's definitely a maintenance element to how often that your crews are kind of cleaning it up and keeping it clean. But they do have it in Denver, and then I think they also have it in North Glen.
Yeah, and have you guys gone and toured and seen one that's been down there for a year or 2 years or 3 years, so you have firsthand knowledge that that looks okay? I worry about, people hold Old Town so precious that, it needs to look. The question I would have then also is, compared to just repaving those crosswalks with actual brick instead of plastic, what's the price difference, the delta in doing that?
I'd have to get back to you on that exact number,
Okay.
but I do know when we met internally that the maintenance folks said they can't even find those bricks anymore that we have that are the same, so it would be kind of a bigger process to go out and rebid.
Well, and not even necessarily
find
the
that.
same, but even like this with a herringbone red brick, something that would fit into Old Town, but have it actually be brick instead of a plastic overlay.
Yeah, we'd have to get back to you with some numbers on that. That bottom right is actually, it's like stamped concrete, so it's not actual brick, which is another option to look at.
Yeah, that's fine too. And then go ahead and go forward a couple of slides too, if you don't mind. And the second question I would have, maybe from this one, or go back from this one maybe. On the right side of that picture is the drop off and pickup lane for the G line. It looks like this will have an impact on people being able to do that, or at least will it take away some of the length of that pickup and drop off line? Are we feeling like that's a worthwhile trade there, that we lose some pickup and drop off space?
So I believe currently there's 5 spots there, and this would take 1 spot away, so there would still be 4 of those drop-off spaces.
Flip forward to the next picture where you've got the planter.
So we're talking about 1 parking space on the east side and 1 parking space on the west side of the intersection along the platform. And currently, what we have is we've designated part of that for police parking.
Right.
And what happens, and this is part of the experience that pedestrians are complaining about, is that if you have a delivery truck, for example, pulled up into that parking space near the crosswalk, it is basically blocking the view of oncoming vehicles. Kind of what we're hearing about Yukon at 57th Avenue, when you have that roadside, the sight lines blocked. That's what's happening. The intersection is too crowded, basically, with parking. So of the 5 spaces to the east and the 3 spaces to the west, we're talking about 1 space on each side of that intersection being impacted. So 2 spaces total being repurposed for this project.
But so you're talking about actually taking 2-hour parking spaces away, but keeping the drop-off, or are you talking about taking spaces from the pickup and drop-off? Isn't there supposed to be a lane there where you can just pull over to the side,
Yeah.
let somebody out, let somebody get in,
Yeah.
whatever, and drive away? Does this, certainly at least right at the crosswalk or where the planters are, that would preclude that from happening?
Yeah, so this entire plaza frontage has pickup and drop-off. One side to the west is basically the 3 parking spaces that are 30-minute at all times. And then the area to the east is 15-minute parking, loading, unloading, basically during the daytime hours. So it's open to parking in the evening after 7 o'clock. That's the lowest demand time, basically, for this. So some loading and unloading would be available at all times for the G line. However, some of that loading area will be impacted. And we're noticing that with the amount of activity there, for example, again, delivery trucks and that kind of thing, that they can still work with the number of spaces that we're proposing after we implement this project.
Okay, all right, thanks. I guess that's the good thing about it being a pilot project, right? If it doesn't work, we can.
Absolutely, we can
Change.
remove it and restore it back to what it is.
Right.
I do want to point out one thing related to what you were asking about earlier about the crosswalk material. So it's called thermoplastic. It's the same material as our other pavement markings that we have in the streets. They're skid resistant, they're reflective at night, and this particular design is compliant with the MUTCD. So in some areas, folks have tried different things. They're paint or they're thermoplastic that hasn't been basically implemented in the same way that we're proposing this to be implemented. And if placed in an arterial kind of situation where you have a lot of traffic running over them, after a while they do wear out and you just have to remove it all and replace it again from scratch. So we're going to be watching to see how much of that is going to happen here with this pilot project, how much of that wear and tear is going to impact the aesthetic, and then what the cost would be basically to come back and redo it if needed.
Yeah. Well, I would hope if the pilot project is successful and it leads to a settled design, that we would look at doing it for real, kind of doing it out of materials that would meet people's expectations in Old Town. It might look great, and it might, especially when it's new, and it might look fine when you're driving through it in your car, but I think, Old Town's one of those places, it's like the bathroom in your house. It's the most expensive square footage in the whole place. You want to do the real stuff there, And so for a pilot project, I think it's fine to, experiment with the quicker, faster, cheaper, but that just long term, I hope we keep on the radar, doing it really quality. We want to protect the quality we have there in Old Town. So my input.
Let the record reflect that Mr. Marriott is not looking for the cheapest solution. Mr. Pfeiffer.
Good point. Can you go back to the different crosswalks again? Because I'll give back a history moment here, that right there. So I brought this up to Bob Manwaring a couple years ago about using this instead of the bricks, because the one in the bottom right-hand corner, I think, is made out of Colorado Springs, and they heat up the asphalt, and so it looks like bricks, and I think it lasts a lot longer. The concern I have with the one up there in the left upper corner, I think Denver used that on Spirit Boulevard, and it did not look very good after a while. High traffic, a lot of heat. So low traffic, I'm sure it's going to be okay, but I'll just point out there is one area that doesn't look very healthy. I wish, to go with what Mr. Marriott was saying, maybe a middle ground would have been, if this does work, this asphalt impression that they do. I know there's some skid resistance and stuff. So it's kind of like not as expensive laying bricks in the street, but maybe not as cheap as the plastic stuff. So a couple things I wanted to bring up. One, I've always been concerned with the crosswalks, and I know I'm reflecting back, I'm bringing up Bob a lot, Manwaring. He did not want, I pushed to get more stripes in these crosswalks, because when there's more stripes you can see, but there was a discussion that, oh, well, the tire treads run right here, so we're going to skip those, so we make it really wide. And so no one really pays attention to the crosswalks because there's just few. And I think striping alone makes a huge difference. And so when we look at 57th, I'm assuming you're going to restripe the street all the way across. Is that a true assumption? I didn't hear you say that, but.
Yeah, where the crosswalks are missing, we plan
Okay,
to add
and so when
those
we
in.
stripe it, can we stripe it where it's noticeable, not just very thin, with stop lines?
Yeah, so what we've done is whenever we have a striping project, we refer back to our engineering standards, and all the dimensions for those crosswalks are based on, the spacing between them, the length, the width, everything is based on those standards. Sometimes the placement is shifted to make sure that they're out of the tire track, but the dimensions are still laid out, in our engineering standards, and that's what we follow.
Yeah, I just think if we can try to make them more visible than thin. The impression I was left was it was costing too much money to replace those crosswalks where the tires go, and I get that, but and maybe there's some other way to visually see that there's a crosswalk coming up, because sometimes I don't think, like in some cities I drive through, I can see that is a crosswalk, and you're very aware to stop before it.
Yeah.
And then also we don't seem to use those lines, the stop lines, as often as we do, and some areas we do, and some areas we don't. So there's not consistency in when we use those.
Yeah.
But that I think is an imaginary barrier for people to kind of stop before they hit the crosswalk would be nice, because when they're not there, people stop in the crosswalk.
Yeah.
I've noticed, and a good example is King Soopers on 58th. There's no stop line, so everyone blocks when they're trying to cross the street there. So maybe if we get consistency with that might condition some behavior for some folks to also, not block the pedestrian.
We're certainly wanting to experiment with a few different ideas when it comes to these crosswalks. The bars and then the stop bar behind the white bars is what we're proposing for Old Town, with the middle section of them, having the decorative treatment. So what we plan to do is basically see what works best, and indeed we'll try to see what we could do with the stop bars too.
Yeah, and the last thing I just want to say is these are efforts towards Vision Zero.
Yes.
And we as a community, as Dr. Cog's Vision Zero and CDOT's Vision Zero, I think we're walking this way. I would encourage council to maybe think about us adopting Vision Zero, which is really just a bunch of tools and methods and to reduce conflicts like this, and that we're committed towards a mission of making our roads safer, as well as more walkable and use of bikes. And with the recent death on Indiana and other pedestrian conflicts, that I would love to see what Vision Zero would be for us in our community.
Thanks. Mr. Jones?
Well, I jumped ahead, so I need to wait on my question. So they're not there yet.
Okay, Ms. Ford?
So I would like to agree with Mr. Marriott on the quality, because when it was first proposed to the bid, that was my thought in terms of additional cost. Do we do a cost-benefit analysis on the maintenance of replacing the less expensive pavers in Old Town in terms of labor costs? And we talk about it being more expensive, but that's an initial expense. Over the lifespan, do we look at the cost in terms of buying the cheaper materials and then replacing them on a regular basis?
Yeah, apparently for Old Town, talking to our colleagues in the Parks Department that maintain pavers in the sidewalk areas and help us with the aesthetics within Old Town, this particular paver they can't seem to even get is the issue, and that some alternative is necessary. So we're trying to be careful about the aesthetics in Old Town, of course. That's a priority. And we've heard from the bid and folks that they're excited for potentially art or different things within the crosswalk area. And that's something that we're going to consider if this is a program and it's successful as it moves forward. But in terms of, say for example, stamped concrete, that's when you have a very high cost for, say, repairs. If a utility breaks, which in Old Town there's quite a lot of stuff underground, it is very costly to restore that kind of material back to the aesthetic that it was originally put together at. So this is our way of responding to the safety concerns with something lighter and quicker, and then obviously cheaper. And in doing so, we're going to try to figure out basically how does this compare to the other alternatives. Within a year's time, does it wear in a way that is no longer aesthetically pleasing, or is it going to be okay and still fit the character of Old Town? And after several years, we just need to come back and redo it. I get the sense that we're going to get away from treatments that require concrete, which is the case with pavers. They require a concrete base to hold it all together, as well as sand below it. And it's a very, not only is it difficult to procure the materials for that, but also when there are problems underground, it is very costly to put it back together to the same aesthetic, which is why we're seeing in Old Town that the original pavers that were very aesthetically pleasing are now completely worn out, and it's become a problem basically at this point. We're looking for alternatives. to what's there.
We should talk to the Romans. Their roads lasted, what, 3,000 years?
Okay, no more questions yet, but I anticipate there will be one.
All right, a few more slides to
We'll see
finish
when it
up.
pops up.
All right, so in terms of implementation, getting to the quicker part of lighter, quicker, cheaper, if we get the go-ahead, we plan to order materials in the next 2 months or so and have those delivered and received. We'll finalize the design and do the test with our streets teams, just using some regular cones to make sure their plows and everything and machinery can get in. We'll start implementing these communication elements in terms of the website and online survey and things in the next few months as well, and then plan for final installation in early 2020. And from that point of installation is kind of when we plan to do the 6-month pilot project. And so I will turn it over to John to kind of wrap up and talk about potential future opportunities.
Yeah, so one of the advantages of this particular concept and approach is that there's the ability to scale this program to other locations. I think we even discussed a couple of them here tonight. And if successful, we could begin to build a traffic calming toolkit that incorporates this concept and these tools as a toolbox for responding to citizen concerns. We have been discussing this with the Transportation Committee, and it actually aligns with one of their projects that they're currently working on, which is the first and last mile connectivity to transit stations. So they are a fan of this approach and would like to see some of the quicker aspects of this in terms of trying things. If it doesn't work, move on to something else and try to respond to the community and try to improve safety at crosswalks. And if this is successful, our goal is to develop a program that would involve community input. And as we begin to look at different locations around town, we have some criteria around how we would implement this, that this would turn into a program, basically, that the city would then consider locations based on criteria, based on data, so that it's not just haphazard, it's more organized, and it would include the feedback that we get from folks about their experience within crosswalks and within neighborhood residential or pedestrian-friendly streets.
Mr. Jones.
So I first of all, I'll make a comment and then my question. I think that pedestrian safety is key, and I appreciate the fact that you're going through this exercise trying to make these crosswalks and have a plan for future. But my question is, what will determine success? What's the criteria around the 6-month kind of pilot? What's going to make us at the end of 6 months say, oh, that was the best thing we did, or that was the worst thing we did? How are we gauging what success looks like?
Do you want to speak to that from your slide earlier?
So in terms of, I guess it's a little bit more qualitative than quantitative, but in terms of the video monitoring, so we want to look and see how many times there's a pedestrian and vehicle kind of interaction, and what happens. If we see that a lot more, I think maybe we still need to define that, whether it's 80% or 90%, 75% of cars are yielding to pedestrians after an implementation instead of before, then I think we would call that a success. On like turning speeds, if we see before there's people making those turns at 35, 40 miles an hour, and then afterwards it's at 20, you cut the speed in half, and that's below the speed limit, then we would consider that a success. I think a lot of this is feel. So if you're a pedestrian or somebody who lives in the neighborhood, whether or not the speed actually goes down a lot, but if you're in your neighborhood and you feel that the speeds are reduced because of your interactions, and we get that feedback through the surveys and the website, then we would consider that to be another measure of success.
Okay. I think that that's good, but the challenge, I think, still is going to be it's subjective to where you're at with the process. And, so let's just say it's successful, and then we determine that we're going to spend some X amount of dollars to implement this citywide. It feels to me like there's got to be some more qualitative measures in place to determine, how this is impacting the community. And it sounds like you're going to be doing surveys and getting feedback from the community that's impacting the most, one way or the other. But I don't know that this is actually going to slow traffic down on 57th. We get a lot of comments about traffic speeds on 57th Avenue. It feels like it's going to slow traffic down around those particular turns, but so again, I just think we need to think through what success looks like, and it looks like we went back to the measuring success slide. So I don't know if there's anything else you want to say about that.
I think it's a point well taken, and we'll work to get some more qualitative measures.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Ford?
I have a question on the crosswalks. Have we done a lot of public information on what to do when you're approaching a crosswalk? The reason why I'm asking that question is there is a crosswalk near where I live, and my observation is that some stop, some don't at the same time. You know, you might have two cars approaching the crosswalk. One will go through, one will stop. So is there information on that? What is, the legal thing that people are supposed to do? Is it just if I choose to stop for this pedestrian, or what?
No, there is definitely a legal ruling in Colorado, and so it's something that we've talked internally about coming up with some more education and outreach kind of graphics and pieces to distribute to help kind of inform the community, because a lot of people, you take the driver's test once and then you never really have to go through those rules again. A lot of people moving here. So it's something that we can definitely look at including with this, and it's a good way to give it to the kids at school, and then they get it to their parents through their backpacks.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful, because I've also observed that, sometimes the pedestrians assume that cars are going to stop, which I think can be very dangerous. I personally always wait to see if they're going to stop before I start walking, because again, I notice that it's up to the driver, it seems,
Right.
how they're going to handle that.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. Anything else from your presentation?
So that's all from us. We just wanted your feedback
Great.
on this, and appreciate your time. Thank you.
Well, good suggestions. Looking forward to seeing how the pilot projects work.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Devon?
Yes, Mr. Mayor and members of the council, we're going to have a presentation from Ben Irwin on communications and engagement strategy update.
Okay, is there a hologram as part of this demonstration?
Just wait. Just wait. I got to keep you interested all the way till the end of the presentation.
Okay,
so-
good.
Okay.
It's a little inside joke.
Mayor and members of council, it is a sincere privilege and honor to be talking to you today about the city's efforts to create a communications and engagement strategy for the city. It's an honor because, frankly, council has set the vision for this, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And so it's an opportunity to have a discussion in public about the direction we're going and make sure we're headed in the right direction. It's also an honor and privilege because what we're talking about is the work of dozens of people across the city organization, and will ultimately include feedback from hundreds, if not thousands, of people across the community. And so some of the people who've helped are here tonight. I really appreciate members of the city team being here to support this work, but it really is the work of, by my count, more than 40 individuals across the city have contributed to what we're going to discuss tonight, so that's a privilege. I wanted to start with a brief quote. Tell me I forget, show me I remember, involve me I understand. And I do that because we're going to be talking about a lot of conceptual ideas. We're going to try to cover a lot of ground in hopefully a brief amount of time. But the big key takeaway is that organizations, including cities, often do a really good job of telling people things, and they do a relatively good job of showing people. But what I hope we come away with is that involving our community in our decisions and building connections across our community is the work of our time in this city. And that's the real area where we can grow and become more effective. This slide's a brief background, and it's here to suggest that this isn't brand new, that there's been a lot of work in the city to improve communications and engagement over the years. And there's also a strong set of tools that are listed here, just a few of them, that we've been very fortunate to receive resources to have these tools, and a lot of people have worked very hard to leverage these and use them effectively. So we're not talking about reinventing the wheel, we're talking about adding to a path that we're already on. But that path has shown that there's opportunities to improve. And so I know the council's aware of the 2017 community survey, but for the benefit of everyone, I just would offer some additional statistics from that. So in 2017, the community survey showed that roughly half of our community, or half the people that responded to the survey, feel like their expectations are exceeded with how the city engages with them, communicates with them, involves them in decisions. The last bullet is 54%, just 54% of our community felt the sense of community in their neighborhood. And I think we can all agree we can do better, and that was the direction that council offered, and we responded by doing a 2018 the 2018 visioning project, which was really an attempt to do a deep dive into the results of the 2017 survey in preparation for conversations with all of you around the 2020 to 2025 strategic plan. What the visioning showed at a high level amongst a lot, among a broad range of values that were communicated, real-time two-way communication, better community engagement, better sense of connectivity across the community is what people want in the city of Arvada. So again, I mentioned it's the city council's vision, and one of the places we look for that is in your strategic plan that you recently approved. And I've highlighted several strategic results that are within that plan, just as a way to say, first and foremost, we're here tonight to talk about the communications and engagement strategy, which we intend to deliver to council by the end of next year. Fully implement by the end of next year and deliver a draft by January of next year. But it's not just within the organizational and service effectiveness priority area. This work is happening and should happen all over, all across City Council's priorities and concurrently all across the city's organizational structure and work systems. Just a word about the approach that we've taken. Over the last 9 months or so, we've taken steps as a group to look at what we're doing in the areas of communication and engagement and identify opportunities to develop priority actions, streamline processes, and identify some of the strategies that we're going to look at tonight. And that happened through core team development. So we picked, we opened it up to across the organization, and city team members joined core teams that were focused on some of the engagement and communications tasks that we undertake. So there was a communication strategy core team. There's an engagement core team that's focusing on the principles of engagement that we'll get into in a moment. There's a website core team that's looking at all of our websites and figuring out not only what's our long-term strategic goals for those, but how do we improve them on a day in and day out basis starting right now. So when we talk about the structure of the strategy, you can think of it in 3 parts. The highest level, the most conceptual piece, but I would argue one of the most important pieces of this is what we're calling the engagement framework. And this would be probably a good time to say that we didn't invent any of this. The engagement core team I mentioned was made up of members of the police department and our vibrant community and neighborhoods and neighbors connected team, as well as communications folks. And what we did is we looked at what some of our other neighbors across the Front Range are doing in the areas of engagement. We did quite a lot of research with best practices, and we identified and looked at a number of different ways of methodologies to conducting engagement. And we settled on the International Association of Public Participation for a couple of reasons. It's pretty familiar to a lot of different communities in the Front Range. A lot of Front Range communities are using that approach. And also it's something that a lot of our team members were already familiar with. And so this is just a professional organization that's focused on public involvement and how that can inform better decisions across a community. But what it also asks for, it suggests, is having an engagement framework which outlines the principles, the outcomes that we hope to achieve, the expectations that everyone should have when we're in the community or engaging with the community or with members of our own team. And it also articulates the process that we would ideally follow so that whatever we do across the city becomes more consistent. This is an actual physical thing that you will have delivered to you by January of next year, which serves as an internal guide but hopefully also an external, a more user-friendly, accessible version as a formal invitation to our community to re-engage with the city. Supporting the framework are a set of additional strategies. So we anticipate that the framework itself will provide a lot of strategic direction for the engagement that we do, but we also engage in a lot of public affairs communication, internal communication, and work with our internal teams. And so there's a host of other strategies that we've developed and will continue to develop, and I'd like to go into those just briefly later on in the presentation. And then finally, the question is, okay, all the concepts, how do we do the work? And so that piece is the base of our three-part system, where we develop plans and guidelines that build in repeatable processes and standards that ensure that everything is more consistent, not only for our city team, more efficient for our city team, but better to understand, easier to access, clearer for our community, and clear in terms of what we're expecting, depending on how we choose to engage or they choose to engage with us. Now, I mentioned the engagement framework, and I'm going to dig into that a little bit. You can see some of the component pieces to that here, and I'm going to talk about the top level for now. But the core team, the engagement core team, took a look at what does good engagement mean? What does that look like? And ultimately, with the framework, we want to be able to create a promise that we can make to our community. This is how we promise to engage with you, and we ask for your input on something. Or we're telling you some information that will be useful to you and make your life better. Or make it easier to access the city service. Here's our promise to you. This is how it will work. Here are the high-level guidelines that we're hoping to meet. So we looked at what other cities were doing. We brainstormed a long list of ideas about what good engagement should bring, and we distilled that into a set of 5, which you see here. These are draft. Ultimately, we'd like to have these further confirmed with the community, so we will be doing that. But you can hopefully you can see that these resonate in some ways, not terribly brand new. These are things that we should be doing in our engagement. So making sure it's well thought out, and that our communications and engagement is well thought out. It's meaningful. It's asking for meaningful input, or it's communicating and conveying something that's useful for people. It's inclusive and diverse, so it's representing a variety of different perspectives, and it seeks to reach those different people with different circumstances and backgrounds, and it supports government transparency. The team also developed a set of desired outcomes. Again, this list shouldn't be an aha moment. These are things we should be doing, but the advantage of the engagement framework as a document is that it collects all the things we say we're going to do, or that we feel we should do to be good communicators and good engagers within our community, and it creates a reference document that we can look at over and over and over again to ensure that we're being consistent. I mentioned at the beginning of the engagement framework discussion, a big key to this is managing people's expectations. Organizations don't always do a good job. People don't always do a good job of managing expectations when we ask for someone's opinion. So you can maybe, if you can think about ever being asked for your opinion and then never receiving feedback afterwards about what the outcome was, or not having that feedback used in any way. The framework is designed to try to eliminate those and allow people to know that their feedback and input is valued. And we do that through an engagement spectrum. And this is a pretty complex graphic. We could spend the whole time just talking about this, but its purpose, and I'll break it apart in the next slide, its purpose is to clarify the goals, expectations, roles, and methods that we might use for different types of issues, problems, challenges, and decisions that we might encounter as a city, those that we would want community input and involvement in. Here are some specific examples. So what you see is that on the spectrum, it goes from left to right, from inform, consult, involve, collaborate, and empower. And that's a growing depth of engagement. That's a growing expectation from the people involved that their input and their time will be used to impact the project in greater degrees of discretion or impact. So on the left, you see a tweet from last week where we wanted to let people know. We're just informing them. There's a cleanup happening at the West Arvada Dog Park. You know, you can go help. There's lots of volunteers there right now. We shared that because we thought, you know, we wanted people to know that that was happening, give them an opportunity to volunteer. And then somebody had the opportunity to add a comment to the bottom of it in support, and so it amplified what we were saying. That's really what we mean by informing. That's that public affairs piece that when we think of communications, that's usually what we're talking about. But as you move forward, you see an image from a land development code update open house, and that's under that consult area, where we're offering the details of our project up and we're asking for feedback, and we're promising we are going to consider this feedback as we move the project forward. On the far right, it gets even more intensive. So you think of boards and commissions and members of the public volunteering their time to actually focus on issues, define problems, identify solutions to those problems, and provide recommendations to council. And then all the way to the right is empower. That's where the government gives full discretion over to people. And what you see there are some design options for East Rainbow Park. And what we did, you may recall, is that as part of the Taking Lasting Care program, we allowed citizens to vote on which amenities they'd like to have installed in the park. And essentially, the largest vote won, and now it's been installed, and that park is open. So that's that example of deferring the decision over to our community. So I'm going to touch on the internal, on the strategies. There's 3 sets. The first one is internal.
Ms. Ford's got a question.
Okay, great.
Ben, I just have a question in terms of timing with the public participation, because often you hear people saying that our input was asked, but we didn't really feel heard. We felt like the decision was made and it was more or less just, you know, appeasing. So where in the scope, do we look at where in the scope of projects we actually incorporate public feedback prior to any decisions being made?
Yes. And I brought up the desired outcomes because the first bullet is more informed decision making. And so when you think about a decision, one construct that you might be familiar with is a decision making cycle, from like problem identification and definition to identifying options to selecting an option to making a decision and evaluating that decision. And that's really a next step for our engagement core team in the city to look at, is when we say we want more informed decision making, what does that actually mean? And what it actually means is we have to be really honest about different projects and issues that we're responding to and be able to share honestly with our community, this decision has been made. We're going to inform you about this decision. This decision, we haven't fully defined the problem yet. We're going to ask for your help in defining the problem. Or we have identified 3 options. We would like your help in helping us identify or understand which option would be the best to solve this problem or move this policy forward. And so we need those kinds of guides as a next step, so we can at every point to a different stage of the decision-making process and say, oh, okay, we're in an informed phase here. We just really need to let people know what's going on, versus, oh, we have the opportunity to have a workshop and bring people in and actually gather meaningful input from them.
Thank you.
Mr. Pfeiffer.
Thank you. You know, one thing, I'm going to elaborate a little bit more on what Nancy said. I think we hear quite often that there was a public meeting and we quickly get an email that says, I felt like my voice wasn't heard. I mean, I'm going to go back to this because I'm not sure you're quite where I would like to see the conversation. I think culturally within the city, we have to make sure that we don't leave a perception. So through your communication efforts, I think there's a cultural, and maybe it's not, maybe it's just the way we are perceived should not already make it feel like their voice wasn't heard or decisions were already made. So if we're asking for people to be informed or involved or collaborate, that when we have those opportunities and we ask for them, that we have our citizens feel that they're part of it. Does that make sense?
It does. I'd respond, and I may just glance it, and so come back to me, but part of what we need to do is that inclusive and diversity piece and the connectivity is understanding who's at the table and do we have the right people at the table, and really making an effort, redoubling our efforts, I would say, to make sure all of the people that need to be there are there. And so hopefully that process is going to take us to an even more robust way of reaching people. And that's fairly complex in that public affairs, broadcasting on our different communications channels about an opportunity, kind of what we're doing now is, that's step one. But step 2 and 3 are building the relationships with the community even to a greater degree, so that we're ensuring everyone that can meaningfully participate is there, and they can acknowledge they were a part of it. That being said, there's still always going to be people who didn't know about it, or don't feel like they were involved. But we really want to make sure that we're upping our game and going to the next level to make sure that as many different perspectives are there. It may take a little bit more time. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. Internal strategy, I wanted to talk about that first. And there's a lot of detail here. To save time, I'll touch on a couple of things, but we're really wanting to employ an inside-out approach that recognizes our city team are some of our best assets to communicating and conveying what we're doing to the rest of the city and community, as well as being a great feedback loop in the field or amongst our own organization to find out, are the things that we're doing making sense? Are there issues that we need to be addressing? And so the strategies are really about equipping them to be those assets to a greater degree, making sure they have the information they need to thrive in their work and to grow their capacity to be better communicators and engagers. So one thing we're working on right now is I'm working with Noelle Oberg in the organizational development team to develop some training around the engagement framework, bringing in some staff with different types of problems in their work, large projects or some type of communication or engagement challenge, and applying the framework as well as some other communications best practices to sort of train on this. And so we're going to pilot it and see where it goes, but ultimately, as you can see, we want to develop more trainings that help raise people's capacity to be understood and to engage people. And then ultimately, next year we will finalize an online resource for our city team that will make clear all the processes, guidelines, the people that they should be working with for different types of communications and engagement projects. There's also external strategies that need to support the framework. And I would touch on some in the middle. Leveraging technology, data, and the city's broadband connectivity is really, that's the piece about accessibility. Engaging and communicating with people where they are, making sure wherever they are, they can reach city services and grow their connection with the city. I'll touch on the 2020 census as well. The goal of the 2020 census is to count everybody and reach hard-to-count populations. And in some cases, those hard-to-count populations, young people, older people, people who have immigrated to the country, people who don't speak English as their primary language. Those are some of the same people we'd like to engage moving forward to make sure everyone is hearing the information that they need to avail themselves of city services, and most importantly, to feel included in the city's direction and city decisions. And touching on the two-way thing, next year is going to be a time where we're really looking at a lot of our digital platforms. Ask Arvada, arvada.org, just beginning to understand user experience on those platforms and understanding how we can leverage all of these digital tools in concert for text messaging capabilities, the ability to offer more real-time responses and notifications on some type of mobile app or mobile responsive web feature. And when we talk about on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about marketing. I think that there's opportunities to partner with other people in the community and other organizations in the community to make some of that happen. And then later...
Mr. Pfeiffer?
Okay, sorry, one other thing. Since cable is declining, so access to the programming is declining, and then participation is declining, can we in this external strategy include how we engage these type of meetings, the planning meetings with population that may not just have cable or come here or online? Like, I think there's tools out there, and I've seen communities in other cities do other ways of engaging remote users. They're in their office, they can engage into these meetings in a different sense. I think we should widen our lenses a little bit, because I think folks don't want to come just down here, and I know there's rules around it, but I wonder what our legal perspectives would be of how somebody could engage through online chat or something in the conversation, because I think it's I think there's new ways. And right now, or can they look at an app and watch and then engage and see the agenda as it goes through? Because I think I saw a couple cities in Arizona doing it that way. And granted, it's a different state, but let's keep that in mind when we talk about external strategies and communication engagement.
Yeah, that is absolutely relevant. So I will say one of the things that we've heard loud and clear from council is that you're looking to the city team to work with you to identify different ways for the community to engage with you, with your agenda. And so the first step was really just trying to get, make agenda items and align things on city council's agenda with a lot more of what we're communicating in the moment. That's really step one. But as we go forward, we're going to be looking at those types of things to see what if people don't have a comfort level or access to a streaming. I can think of an example from this week already where I heard of someone that didn't have access to streaming but wanted to watch a meeting. And so, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of solutions out there. There's actually some Front Range cities that are exploring additional ways to do that.
Yeah, and I know there's some concerns about, are they citizens, are they not? I'm sure through the water bill, we could probably have their way to log in and know that they're, I don't know, just if we could just have those horizons wide open, that would be awesome.
Yeah,
Thanks.
absolutely. Okay. Marketing strategies. Marketing isn't something that government is always good at or comfortable talking about. We have to be good at it. We have to align our messaging, align our visual identity and brand, because that's part of making city services more accessible for people, telling compelling stories of what people can do in the city or why their input is important, talking about it from a resident's perspective as opposed to always from a city perspective. So you'll see with some of these marketing strategies, what we're attempting to do is take a look at how we present ourselves, both visually, how we present ourselves from a messaging perspective, and seeing if we can do a better job of telling that story. And so what that looks like right now is, for example, an editorial calendar that we've developed that a lot of communications folks across the city have access to that is aligned with your priority areas and your strategic plan. And so we marry to that things happening in the community, things on the city council agenda, and that becomes the source material that guides all of the other channels that we're communicating with the community about. So you have alignment and coordination. And so what you'll see here in some of these examples of specific actions is, why don't we do that with the entire community? What's the city's role in growing that network with some of our partners, like the visitor center or the chamber or the different districts or nonprofits around the city? We want to we want to help contribute to the overarching story of Arvada. And so that's where the technology kind of gets aligned, and how different types of apps or websites could be developed, or different ways we can partner to tell the full picture of the value of this city. So hopefully you see that kind of highlighted there, and I think I've touched on it. But key pieces that we see as early opportunities is to build a richer historical narrative. So we have a rich history. When we talk about something in the present, we should take a moment to acknowledge the history of it. And celebrate city successes, really share the things that we've accomplished in ways from the residents' perspective, in ways that lead them to make informed choices about whether or not they want to participate or not. Storytelling is key, and like I said, we're going to be looking at ways of capturing the city's perspective or residents' perspectives from across the city in video and narrative and photograph. So look for that in the coming year. How it all works, how it happens, I mentioned planning and implementation. And you can see it's plans and guidelines and standards that we all agree to as a city team, and we vet and get feedback from the community to make sure it's right, and then we set performance measures, and we do the work and make sure and continually evaluate. But I would highlight the Community and Economic Development Work System Plan. That's underway. My colleague, Allison Tremblay, is the communications manager for that work system, and she's building and implementing this plan. And the idea is that what we've talked about tonight is the high level, guiding the citywide perspective. We also need to set a game plan for our individual focus areas, our priority areas, so that it matches the need for transparency and engagement along with the goals of each of those areas of work, so they're supported fully. Looking ahead, This work is inevitably resulting in or surfacing some longer-term resource impacts that could be out there. What we're seeing is a demand for engagement, more public involvement. And so we're developing a strategy for that, but we're going to have to think how we leverage our tools, how we leverage the staff that we have, see if there's people that are interested in doing more engagement coordination or helping with that across all the work systems, raising their capacity to do it. So it'll require over the next few years conversations with folks who are really interested in participating in that and making sure that engagement coordination across the city is really coordinated with our communications, our messaging, all of the principles that we've outlined in our engagement framework.
Ms. Ford?
Ben, when the city engages with the community, we tend to engage during the evening hours or, during the day. Is there a possibility that in the future we may engage on the weekends? Vary the schedule for employees in such a way that they can do that occasionally, obviously, not all the time.
Well, I think the short answer is absolutely. I think that happens. I mean, there's certainly events that happen on an ongoing basis that are supported by staff on the weekends, and it would be about augmenting and giving the tools and making sure that a more inclusive or engaging experience is a part of some of those. But absolutely, that is going to be a part of making all of this more accessible for people and in geographic diversity too, by the way, making sure we're having more events across the entire city so that people see those benefits. It's not that we're not doing it now, we just need to do it more. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Arvada, Ask Arvada and Arvada.org. These are two powerful tools that we rely on. Ask Arvada is the name for our platform, our customer relationship management software that allows for real-time questions and service requests to come in online. And so we need to improve that, both in data, capturing data and reporting it, as well as the user experience needs to be improved. So we're looking at what's the user experience now and what are our recommendations for improving it so that we can start to understand what's the best solution out there. But that's the work of the next months in that area. And then at the end of this year, Arvada.org will be 4 or 5 years old or older. And so it's reaching that point where we need to really think clearly about where do we want our website to go. And I've mentioned a host of online opportunities that involve interfacing with phones and 311 services and text messaging. These are all options out there that we need to be positioned to explore. And so what we're doing now is, what we plan to do next year is engage in user experience testing to understand how people are using our site and how we would change it to make it even more successful. And then finally, evolving video and creative needs. We have strong teams and resources to develop video and do graphic design. We're going to have to boost those and grow training capabilities and boost that, because if we're going to tell better stories, we need to use better pictures, better layouts. It needs to be more sophisticated and grow, and we have people really anxious to learn those, but we're going to have to support them to do that. Next steps look like this. We're going to really continue community engagement. I would note that the 2019 community survey has a number of questions about what we're talking about. It's in the field. It will conclude sometime next, I think the 24th of October. And so we're looking forward to those results. But that community engagement will continue through some focus groups and additional surveys to home in on, are we headed in the right direction with the engagement framework and our overall strategy? We want to finalize the engagement framework and strategies and share that with you by January of this coming year. And we're going to use 2020 to continue that planning, to build the guidelines, the standard processes, the repeatable processes, to make sure that everybody's on the same page and knows, okay, when we're going to do a certain type of engagement or communication, here are the tools we have, here's the process, here's who we need to include to make it successful. Before I close and before I get to some questions I have for all of you, I just wanted to, Carice Canales found this, and she was doing some reading on a blog from Bang the Table. That is the provider of our Speak Up Arvada platform. And so perhaps not surprisingly, it also aligns with the International Association of public participation, kind of overarching framework. But this writer says people, governments, and organizations work collaboratively to create and realize sustainable visions for their community's future. It's about working with and listening to communities to build long-term relationships and develop meaningful solutions to complex issues. And so what I hope that you've come away with in my presentation today is that we're working toward that vision and toward that. It's part of a journey that we were already on, and we're adding to it and trying to make it more responsive to where our community is going. So with that, we have a couple of questions.
Ms. Miller's got a question first.
Okay.
First of all, seriously, in the words of Mick Jagger, I loved it. That was fantastic. I love all the people at the table. I love that the visitor center's here. I love all the work that has gone into this. This is what this city has needed, and I am very, very excited about it. So congratulations to you and everybody that has worked on this project. I missed a slide about a hologram.
Oh. Wait, it's there, isn't it? I think I saw it.
I'm just saying, if there was a little puck with a hologram in everybody's living room that could see the council meeting in the living room, and then they could text a question to somebody on the team, and then they could ask it for them, everybody would be engaged because it's cool.
Absolutely.
Just a suggestion.
It's fantastic.
Mr. Jones. Follow that. Good luck.
I don't think I can follow that request. It feels like the Jetsons.
What if I told you that I am a hologram? Right?
You are. I believe it. Well, I just want to go back and make a comment, and actually your question here that's up on the board is kind of feeds into what I was going to say. But in a meeting earlier today, I made the comment around communication that, as we look at this communication model, and I applaud you and the team for kind of diving deep into this, because the communication makes us or breaks us as a city as we try to reach out to the community. We think we've got great ideas on how to do that. However, with technology, there's ways that we can do that even more efficiently, and so I appreciate you kind of marching down that path. But even to the extent of, and I used this phrase earlier, creating a geofence. For me, at my house, I put a geofence up that says, if anything happens inside of this geofence, that information's pinging me kind of automatically. And so I would just encourage the group to continue to look at that and how that kind of technology can provide a better way of communicating, kind of I'm opting in as a citizen now to that kind of constant input and feedback. But I think this is a moving target. And when we think we've got that one issue perfect, it's going to change the next day because something better is going to be available. So I applaud you for continuing to kind of push the envelope on how do we better engage at every level throughout the city. So thank you very much.
I would just respond, I would be remiss if I didn't say we are trying geofencing. The Arvada Economic Development Association and Alley has partnered with the Visitor Center to do that type of marketing to help draw people into Old Town as a pilot. I mean, I think they're seeing some good signs. So we're dipping our toe in these things in ways that make sense to see what works. But yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Don't see any other questions. Now you've got questions for us.
I do. So like I said, again, this is supposed to respond to your vision of what we need for the city. And so again, I want to get a sense if we're on the right track. What are the strategies that we need to be focused on? And then also just knowing, just an opportunity to re-engage that conversation with you about how you would like to see the community engage with you as a body and how you would like to do the same for the community. So any thoughts that you have on that would be appreciated.
Mr. Pfeiffer.
I'll start. So the engagement framework and supporting strategies, I wish it wasn't 14 months. 8, 6 would have been better. Because I think the longer we prolong this topic, which I think it's been going on probably before you got here, we need to react sooner. As far as the second one, how does council want to engage with the community? like I said earlier in our smart city meeting, I want to make sure that the community has, with ease of access to information they're looking for, being the budget, being, simple ways to find this information. It's not, there's so much information that I think we get confused on. We're overloading our citizens. So that would be something I would ask. Whatever you do is making sure it's easy. It's KISS, keep it simple, silly, right?
Right.
And then I would also really push on how do we get more engagement in our public forums, because the feedback I get, the phone calls, emails I get are around, well, one, I didn't know, which goes back to my previous statement. And I wish I'd known, because then I might have engaged, or I've sent a letter, or I would have done something. And so somehow we're missing that communication and the opportunity to engage. So any way you can figure out, it's complex, I think that's a good word to use, to close that gap, that would be awesome. So
Great.
that would be my feedback.
The
Ms.
one
Ford?
thing, would it be all right if I just respond to one thing?
No.
Okay.
Yes, of course.
So, just to say, I think, speaking for everyone in the city, we feel that urgency to get a plan in place, and I don't think we want to deliver a tangible product to you in January of 2020 to say this is how we're operating, because we feel that urgency. We know that where our community is going in terms of its needs, for its demands and expectations for transparency, that's growing, and we need to move to meet that expectation and be in step with them. So I would agree that, yeah, ultimately full implementation of this strategy will take 14 months, but we're doing it now in many important ways, and how we're working together. We're building some of these processes now, and we're committed to giving council and the community an engagement framework that's our promise for good engagement within the next several months. So,
Will you be releasing parts of your engagement over the time, or are we waiting to the end of December and saying, ta-da?
I'm not sure I understand.
So whatever ideas or marketing strategies you come up with, how are you going to implement them at the end of the year, or are you going to introduce the strategies and ideas or tools or technology or whatever you're using over the next 14 months?
Over the next 14 months. Yeah, we're not going to keep everyone in suspense for 14 months.
Okay.
We're doing this. We started with some of the high-level conceptual strategic pieces first, because we want to do what we do. We want to be durable and lasting. But we're implementing things all the time as a team in all of these different areas across the portfolio of tools that we have.
Okay, thanks.
Ms. Miller?
Thank you. I just have a couple of engagement pieces I would love to see. How would the council like to engage with the community? However you need us to be. We'll be at block parties. We'll be wherever you need us to be. I know I will. Maybe John. I'm just kidding. He goes to all of them. I know he will. I just like picking on him. But as far as celebrating our wins, you and I spoke about this when we met earlier, but I just love everybody to hear it, is we win a lot, and we need to shout out the cool things that we do. One of the things that I spoke to Mr. Irwin about earlier was during the candidate forum, I really saw how much the public doesn't know about how awesome we are. Because a lot of the questions that were asked by people, and this is the APA group, and they are knowledgeable. They're at City Council on Monday nights, so they know, they're in the know. And they still ask questions about things that we already do. I'm like, what? What we do? So I think we need to celebrate our wins a little bit more, and that's with little videos, and it's in all the different mediums, right? And I think that we can do a good job of letting our community know who our team is, Allie puts a video out there about what she does, and Jean Gordon and Cindy, everybody, little videos in our Parks Department and Public Works, and everybody, this is Teresa, she's the one who makes Old Town look gorgeous with these flowers, things like that, humanizing the city and making the city people instead of an entity. And I think when you make an organization people, then you earn that trust with the community. So that's just where I would take that engagement. And then when we do things like celebrate our team and do the employee appreciation events in the park, invite the public, bring them all out and let them see who wins Employee of the Month and make them pancakes and burgers. I just think that's cool. A notice out to everybody in the area. So Those are just some thoughts, random thoughts by Dot, sorry.
I would just add one thing in addition to thanking you for all that input. Highlighting our staff and making the city team more human is part of our strategy. So we're working on doing like anywhere from more in-depth interviews to brief 30-second, 45-second spots with staff from all over the organization to talk about why they love working here, what they do, and how their work aligns with city council priorities. And so it's part of that mission, vision, and values work. It's part of our journey to excellence, and that's a big component. Because ultimately, we need to get away from city staff and community. It's going to be one big community, and the city team is a big part of that, and this is what they do.
Real quick, two good examples. They're both with the mayor on this one, of where she's saying be like human. When you met with Hackberry Elementary and had lunch, remember that one from 10 years ago or whatever? That was a great one. And then when I think you did the ride along with Chief Link, those kind of stories, I got more feedback on those stories because it was very human. You felt like you were part of something special. And so I just want to elaborate on what Dot said because that's spot on. So, and those are examples where we've done that, and it's been very successful.
Ms. Ford?
I echo what Ms. Miller is saying, too. I think it's fantastic. I think of one person in particular, and there are many, many in this organization, but I think of Cliff Deeds, for example. A perfect example of an employee who lives here in Arvada, loves Arvada, cares about Arvada. And I think that's something that people have to know. Not just the employees, when we see something, but because then it really does, and the same thing for council as well, because I think that so often there's this feeling that council's here and we are out of touch with people. And I think it's so important for people to understand that we are all residents of this community, and we want to make it a better place. And then to answer, well, first of all, I also am going to echo Ms. Miller in saying that I was absolutely blown away when I read this document. I thought it was wonderful. So thank you, and all who have contributed to the document. It's great. It's a good vision for this city. And on number two, I think that the more council can engage with the community, the better. And, if there are ways that staff feels or the team feels that, it would be advantageous to have a council member, I think all of us are probably open to that. I think that's really important, so.
Great. Thank you for that. I would say we're actually inspired. I mentioned that history piece. That goes to staff experience as well. And so when we learned that Mr. Sullivan and Mr. Dietz were going to retire, that's 81, 82 years of experience in the city with our water utilities. And so we were thinking, could we have them interview each other on camera? And so
that could be dangerous.
But I want to say, look for that, because we want to do that, and that was going to be a kickoff of kind of capturing some staff and city team experience, just to give that context to people. Unfortunately, we had the opportunity to do it with Chris Daly first. So that's our first step, but we'll do it with additional folks.
If you can humanize Chris Daly, you've done a great job. No, he's great. Okay, Mr. McGough.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the plan is exceptional. I'm really impressed with it. From a council-centric point of view, as I take a look at it, our primary ways at present of interacting with the public is through email, the telephone, and of course we have lots of personal contact too as we encounter people within the community or they seek us out for individual meetings. And we have public meetings or with constituents in groups. And then of course our public hearing process. But for the most part, these are issue by issue, where we get a telephone call on an issue, or at the other end, we have a public hearing on a particular issue. I'm impressed here that the council will have lots of additional information. There's lots of other ways, not only that the council will interact with the public, but that information will come to the council, not about just issue by issue, but about the overall vision of our community. So I thank you very much for, and all those who contributed to the plan, for putting this together in a really effective presentation this evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Jones?
So there's not a lot I can add to what they've said, but there's two people in this room who have historical information about Arvada, Mark McGough and Nancy Young. And so I would encourage you to also, as part of this communication, be pushing historical things, because there's a lot of new people to Arvada that I think would love to hear the stories of Arvada as we kind of bring this all the way around. So again, I echo the sentiments of everybody else, so thank you.
That's a great suggestion, and I thank Councilmember McGough for the time he's already given. We've captured his insights on camera and plan to feature those in different ways. But yeah, we're open to particularly other community members and get their thoughts as well. So.
Right. Well, I'll close it out with just, the skill set of our team and what you all bring to the table, and the time and effort that you've put into this are obvious. And thank you for your hard work, your thoughtfulness, the strategic thinking, which I think is very important. I look forward to when the hologram gets implemented. And then how does the council want to engage with the community? I think that's an interesting discussion. Certainly, as Mr. McGough expressed, I think we have lots of opportunities, and we take advantage of those opportunities. One thing I want to caution a little bit, and this isn't to be a wet blanket, but I think, and I know that Lakewood has started a program where they're allowing citizens to have public input on public hearings prior to the public hearing. I think there's some significant, I'm sorry I put my lawyer hat on, I think there's some real significant concerns about that and how it's handled and whether or not that's an appropriate way. And frankly, and maybe it's because I've spent so much time in the courtroom over the years, credibility is hugely important. And I think you need live people in chambers talking to us pro and con on those important quasi-judicial matters. So, as we move forward and have discussions about how do we best get input, I think we still have to protect due process and make sure that we're watching our P's and Q's when it comes to the legal aspects of it as well. So with that, great job, great discussion. Thank you all for your input. Thank you to you and your team. Look forward to watching as this moves forward, and really thrilled that we're not going to just put it in a box with a big bow on it and wait 14 months, that we are going to be seeing the successes and celebrating the successes as we go. Great.
Thank you.
Mr. Devon, anything else you've got?
No, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you for your great input and feedback tonight.
Right. Everybody have a good night.